We would not be here if it wasn't for the art market, so let me just start with that. There's an endless debate whether art is an emotion, a commodity, a product, an asset class, or a weapon good, or all of these and none of these. In essence, why do you think art is valuable and in what way is very crucial to be answered. Who or what gives art its value? Is it the market, defined as the people who might want to buy something or a part of the world where something is sold? In essence, we are part of the market and we impact it as well. Is it the brand, the art maker, the time in which it is made, its price, the ones who view it, the ones who write about it, the primary or secondary or tertiary market it is sold in, and much more? Stakeholders across the economy and the arts market examine why art remains a long-standing, long-term investment, what gives it its value today, and how is that value sustained. That's what this panel aims to tackle. Stakeholders across the arts market examine why, what gives it its value, and how that value is sustained for art. So we have Megha Malagatti, Managing Director, India, Hermès. We have Damian Vesey, Director, International Specialist, South Asian Modern and Contemporary Art, Christie's. We have Dr. Rakesh Mohan, who will be joining us very, very soon at that very chair, an economist, former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, and he is the member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council as we speak. James Green, Senior Director and Head of London, David Zwirner, and Roshni Vadhera, Co-Director, Vadhera Art Gallery, and they discussed this with moderator Kabir Jhala, who is the art market editor for the art newspaper, and I hand this over to him to take us forward.
Is that, yeah, there we go. Thank you. So just to reiterate that great introduction, we'll be talking today about the value of art, not just about the price as you might think as you walk through this fair, but really all aspects of what makes an artwork valuable and who decides that. To judge the value of art is not a simple exercise, nor a solitary one. Art's worth as an object of beauty, a store of economic value, a historical document, or even a reflection of social ideals is not intrinsic. It's shaped over time, sometimes in collaboration, sometimes in conflict. It's a reflection of demand, labor, the time it was made, and importantly, it's not just a reflection of its maker, but the various actors who go into shaping its circulation and reception. And so, to that, I am joined by currently 4 and about to be 5 speakers who each represent various corners of the ecosystem, from 2 gallerists, one of whom runs one of India's largest and most venerable galleries, the other a director at one of the world's greatest global art dealerships, an auction house specialist who has set world records for South Asian art, and a luxury branding expert who exposes art to new and exciting audiences. And of course, a foremost economist who's about to join us, who has steered the entire framework of public policy in India for more than 3 decades. And so throughout this panel, I want to give a clear sense of how these various actors on stage define value and shape what we see in our opinions of it. So I'm going to first ask each of the panelists who have already been introduced, for them in their own words, to explain how they bring value to the ecosystem of art. Perhaps we'll start with you, Megha.
Thank you, Kabir. I think at the heart of luxury is always the product, from the luxury perspective. And when a product has to be brought into life, there's this entire time that you take to create the dream that needs to be converted into reality, which you can feel and hold. And this is what luxury is about, and art has a very crucial space in this creation process, because if you take any of the creator of luxury brands, it always starts with a design, a little sketch that gets converted, transformed into a reality that can be either worn or used as an object at home. So this entire creation process of one object, not only just the process of creation from the creator, but also using the materials in it. At Hermès, for example, we age the leather for a very, very long time before any bag is made. We use, in another brand that I was working, which is Estée Dupont, we use natural lacquer that goes on metals. But the lacquer, you have to kind of, get it from the sap of the tree, extract. It's a handmade process. You age it, you store it, and mix ingredients to bring the colors out, and then you put it on the metal. And it's hand painted. And it takes hours and hours to make one product. And this is very similar to what I have been seeing here in the morning, walking around in the booths, when I see all the artists expressing their own techniques and creativity. I think this is where, even in luxury branding, when we're talking about luxury branding, yes, there is this notion of 150 years old, 200 years old maisons that have been doing fantastic products time and time again, right from the mode of transportation changing from boats to airplanes to cars to what it is today. And hopefully in future, it's also going to change the way we use products. And I think all of this creativity really nurtures a luxury brand to keep its essence of what it is historically, at its heritage, and then bring in the modernity to bring it into the new world to make it relevant today.
Do you mind passing to James?
Hi, yes, delighted to be here. At David Zwirner, we are, if we're first and foremost an artist-focused gallery. So, we represent about 73 artists in the States, and our first thought is always, in adding value and adding support to them and their careers. And, that comes from what we do within the gallery with our exhibitions. Adding critical value, I think, is always crucial. And we have David Zwirner Books, which has been running now for around 15 years, publishing catalogs, monographs, encouraging critical writing and reviews. And I'm looking at an image here of Huma Barber, who just opened a show at the Fondation Giacometti in Paris. What happens outside the gallery are partnerships with institutions, museums, and that reach around the world. So I think what we do away from the gallery with our artists is as important as what we do in the gallery. And that includes art fairs and encouraging visibility and introducing artists to new audiences around the world as well. Oh, yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you for having me. I want to just give a little bit of historical background. The gallery's been around for 40 years. My father started it in 1987. So since we are talking about the art market, I want to very humbly and proudly say that my father's been one of the key players in building the market for modern and contemporary art. The gallery started in 87, like I said, but in the early 90s, he started visiting the Christie's office in London, convincing them to do the first Indian art auction. So he's actually been instrumental in making international auctions possible. I guess now galleries and auction houses don't work as closely together, but I think for him, it was so important to build the market within India and abroad that he recognized that only if international auctions actually start giving visibility to South Asian art would the market build. So not only was he working very closely with artists, but he was also working with auction houses. He dreamt of an art fair happening. He dreamt of a gallery district happening, which is finally happening now. I joined the gallery in 2004, which is when the boom started happening. I got very lucky with that, of course, so I didn't have to do so much of the hard work that he did. But it's been an interesting time because, he worked closely with Christie's for 25 years, but now the gallery scene has changed so much, and now it's become so much about institutional acquisitions, publications, art fairs. And so I think we'll talk a little bit about that and how that kind of helps build value for artists and galleries. Just giving a little bit of background there.
Thank you, Roshni. And Damian?
Thank you. So I work at Christie's, which is the auction house and the secondary market. We're in our 260th year this year, so we have a kind of weight of responsibility there. coming at the end, I think, works well because the secondary market really only exists after a healthy primary market does exist. And it was wonderful having these collaborations with Mr. Vadera over the years, where he really did create a lot of that excitement around the market. But fundamentally, the way an auction house works within a market, and maybe its sort of relationship to value, is that we source works. We then have research the works, we value the works, we ultimately present and contextualize them, and then you sell them in a very different way than in the primary market, because it is in a fundamentally transparent and very demand-driven market situation, which is very different. So my role is very much, therefore, about access. By access, you mean access to wonderful works of art, and the discovery aspect is the most exciting part of what I get to do. It's about expertise in making sure that we're able to contextualize works. There's a lot of research that goes on, and all of behind the provenance, the history of works. A lot of the time, you're starting from a situation where a work has not got a wealth of literature already in existence about it, so you're having to do that primary research yourself, which is a joy for us, and then it becomes about the education of that really to everyone else, so that you're able to correctly position these works. But I thought maybe a good quick example, if Kabir will let me, is to refer to one of these slides that is really about the most notable painting that we've sold for Indian modern art, which is the Volodarsky Hussain, also known as Gramyatra, which we sold last year for $13.75 million, which was and is the record. But that really perfectly encapsulates the kind of journey and how an auction house works and how my role in it. I was very lucky because I was there from the first surprise email where this work that's now on the screens appeared in a very different grainy BlackBerry photo, split in two because it was too long, in what looked like a hospital corridor with a defibrillator in the background, and it came from a small auction house in Norway, saying, "Could this be something you would be interested in? Is it Indian?" ? And of course, when you see something like this, you think this is either something amazing or it's a poster or a drawing or something like that. So this was back in 2013, and there was a lot of research over the years that went into it. Of course, you get the joy of going out and seeing it in person, realizing it is just exciting as you think it is. But this was a work that it wasn't out there, wasn't known, so we had to really go on our journey of discovery. And you see the other photo there of Leon Volodarsky. This painting was actually gifted to a hospital in Oslo in the 60s and belonged to the gentleman Volodarsky, who was a Jewish doctor from Ukraine, who as a teenager left rural Ukraine to try and make his way in Europe. But the First World War broke out, so he ended up signing up and getting injured at Ypres, being sent back to the UK for medical treatment. And then when he left, he went to get on a ship to take him back to the Ukraine and Russia. But he had a change of heart, and because of the political situation, and decided instead that he would get off in Norway. And he didn't speak a word of the language, but managed to pick it up quickly, was incredibly bright, trained as a doctor, put himself through his whole education, became a successful doctor at the University Hospital in Oslo. But then, unfortunately, the Second World War broke out, and as the Nazis invaded Norway, he actually had to ski over the mountains into Sweden to escape persecution. I'll cut this short. I know this is getting very long, but it was just an amazing story that this Volodarsky ended up traveling the world as a doctor, spent time in China, spent time in Korea, spent time eventually in Delhi in the 50s, setting up a World Health Organization TV center. And it was during that stay that he picked up this amazing work. I could go on, but
I think that's probably all we have time for right now, Damian. And we will return to the Gram Yatra and what it's done to the idea of Indian value and the value of Indian art. But Roshni, you said something that I think I want to use to pick up on the next theme that we're going to talk about, which is that I'll first give it to Megha though. In terms of Videra, your gallery used to collaborate with auction houses a lot more, and we've had an explanation from all four of you as to what roles you play in the ecosystem. But I want to really stress that none of you play those roles siloed. Everyone is within an ecosystem and is actually a more collaborative effort than people realize. However, I really want to dig into where those circles sort of overlap. So obviously, things like the relationship between the secondary and the primary market, but also the collaborations between luxury brands in art as well. So Megha, perhaps we can first speak to you about why luxury brands partner with art. I want to give a bit of context before. So the art world is much smaller than the luxury fashion world and the luxury goods world. Just one fact I love to trot out is that the annual turnover of LVMH, the world's largest luxury conglomerate, is more than the entire turnover of the global art market. Art is actually much, much smaller than luxury. And so when you see these collaborations, you have to ask, why does a luxury house want to partner with art? It's often not because they need it for more revenue. It's something else. It's another aspect of art's value that is so enticing. And it's interesting to understand what both art and luxury get out of each other. So Megha, if you can explain.
Thank you, Kabir. It's a very interesting point of view because collaborations are not new in the world of luxury. Collaborations have been happening since the birth of the luxury maisons, which was 150, 200, 300 years ago. If you take a look at French brands that moved to New York, to the Fifth Avenue, in the early 1900s, I can name, whether it was Vuitton or Cartier or Estée Dupont. Cartier and Estée Dupont were in the same building and they were making products together. When Vuitton was making a trunk case, Baccarat was making bottles for the trunk cases. So collaborations are not really new in the world of luxury. But how do you keep relevance in the modern world? And how do these partnerships and collaborations make sense to bring two different DNAs as one and represent them as a whole together? That's the question that we ask in the luxury world, because yes, there are thousands of collaborations happen, but not all of them really work. And these partnerships and collaborations are very essential to us. If you look at all the big groups, whether it's Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, Richemont, Kering, or Hermès Group as well, all of us, we have our own art foundations. This is where we get our inspiration from. All of these groups, I'm 100% sure they're circulating Indian Art Fair today and picking up some of the arts from there, because India is definitely going to be the next market to move into. And what are the kind of collaborations that we're going to do? One of the good examples is Dior, what they did with Chanakya in Mumbai when they started. And I have been blessed and lucky in a way to work on all of these collaborations and partnerships in Paris as part of Comité Colbert, the group, which houses 72 luxury brands and brings out the new designers, young designers who work in. And when we look at partnerships being born, there is a very thin thread that holds the artist and the house of creation together. And that thin thread needs to be defined very well, which then starts with a partnership. For example, we saw one lighter of Estée Dupont, which was done by Princess Tania de Bourbon-Parme, who is the last descendant of Napoleon in France, or the partnership which Dupont did with Monet at Hermès, that's the one. The Orient Express collection, it's a beautiful one that we did when I was working there as well. Absolutely completely handmade with lacquer and details. Example, the scarf that I'm wearing, in fact, is designed by an artist, you know. So all the prints that go on in each and every Hermès collection is done by an artist. And hence the collaboration is very, very key to the luxury brand. And it adds a lot of value at the end of the day because it's not just product, you then descend it across all platforms because that becomes your storytelling, your narrative. And then you drop it down in your communication, you drop it down in your retail, in your pop-up stores, in your events that you do across. So every brand has its own theme every year, and that theme is the one that defines partnerships. Sorry.
I think maybe I'll just hold on to this. Yeah, I think at this point, James, I'd love for you to be introduced into this conversation. A very well-known collaboration that took place a couple of years ago was with an artist who you work with, Yayoi Kusama. She has had a very widespread collaboration with the fashion house Louis Vuitton. And I think it's interesting to sort of bring up this idea that both you and Roshni, you know, you're not just art dealers, you're custodians of an artist's career. You build an artist's career over time. It's not just about selling the art, but it's about where you place that art and in which circles you circulate that art. So how does a gallery go about deciding which brand partnerships are right? And, you know, for example, are there artists on your roster who you would never suggest to partner with a luxury fashion house?
Absolutely. I think, you know, one of the key jobs for, you know, for any gallery, for any gallerist working with artists is to sort of not have any kind of general idea of those things. You know, each case is specific, each artist is specific, each relationship is specific. So, you know, there are definitely examples like the Kusama one. I saw there was a slide showing some of that, which I think arguably is one of the best and most successful brand collaborations between artist and brand of all time in terms of, for the brand in terms of sales and also for the artist in terms of increasing audience that importantly hasn't affected the kind of critical view of her work in the art world in the sense of continuing to have museum shows, etc. But we also work with a number of artists and estates who will never ever do a brand collaboration ever as a point of principle.
Could you give us an example of one?
I could give you, we just did a show in London with the estate of Diane Arbus, who very famously, you know, have over the years, this is a photographer, late great American photographer, working in the 60s and has, you know, that estate, the artist died in 1962, so that's many decades of saying no to every request to even use an image in something, let alone actually a collaboration. And that, you know, that has not affected the perceived value of that work. But at the same time, there are other artists where they may have that view of not doing collaborations, they would actually be positive. So I think our job, I see our role as a gallery as giving, you know, giving the best advice in the specific case.
That's a really good point. I'm also interested to eke out this notion that both art and luxury, they work on an economics of scarcity as well. You don't simply just sell to anyone, and you know, you obviously want to control to an extent who owns an artwork for a variety of reasons. However, do you think that, for example, having a very well-known artist whose market is very strong, partnering with a luxury label is a way to circulate that work without necessarily having to, you know, shall we say, lower prices dramatically, or, you know, make it mass? Is that something that you think about?
I mean, I think if it suits the work and if it suits the core of the practice, Kusama, you know, that work is about this sort of universal engagement and you know, kind of participation has always been a part of her practice since the 60s and the Infinity Room. So it's very logical for her to work with a brand that, you know, has a kind of global reach, and in a way, that's another form of increasing participation. People, you know, might be not buying one of her paintings, but they're buying a Kusama product, and that kind of seems a very logical fit. I think it's when an artist, you know, if an artist's practice is much more about scarcity and something more interior, that would, to me, be a more unusual collaboration.
Sure.
But
yeah, That's a really good point. I want to now introduce the dynamic of the secondary and primary markets as well in terms of ascribing value. Just before backstage, Roshni and Damian, you were actually having an interesting conversation around demand and to what extent demand shapes value. And Damian, you were sort of making the point as an auction house specialist that demand really drives how auction houses ascribe value. And Roshni, I thought it was interesting you pushed back a little on that. Maybe you'd want to explain why.
So I think the best example of something like that, exactly what you're saying, because Damian was like, oh, it's the scarcity that drives the market. And I mean, I have an Atul Dodia exhibition on right now who would arguably be one of the most prolific contemporary artists, and it sold out before the show opened. So if there is, I mean, there's an artist whose work is quite widely available, but the exhibition still sells out before it opens, I think that kind of goes to prove the opposite. And of course, with the secondary market, with auctions, I think auctions are extremely strong on the modern art side. And just to, you understand the difference between modern and contemporary. We say it differently here in India, but modern being the masters and contemporary being artists like Reena or Atul here. And the galleries often push back on contemporary works coming up in auction because we feel that they don't achieve the prices that we often quote at the gallery, and whereas auctions end up doing really well with the modern masters. So I think there's so many things at play over here, where the gallery is exhibiting, where the work is coming from. With contemporary art, it's institutional acquisitions, it's publications, it's biennales. There are so many other things that drive the market. Artists who I represent, like Shilpa Gupta and Nalini Malani, got a lot more international acclaim before they got popular in India because of the mediums they used, new media work, video work that were very difficult to consume with Indian collectors. So I think there's a lot more at play here than just demand and supply.
I mean, I think that you've brought up the interesting point that the globalization in the Indian economy is sort of that moment that you see a lot of installation and video artists finally, and often, funded from, organizations abroad as well, collectors abroad. You see that sort of come in to Indian art. I think if anyone had the opportunity to go see the exhibition at the Barbican in London, The Imaginary Institution of India, which charted about 30 years from the 70s to the 90s, you really see that moment where all of a sudden Indian artists start working in large installations in new media. It's a really interesting turning point.
I just want to say one more thing though, that because I feel like the Indian art ecosystem is a little bit smaller than how things are done abroad, we actually don't work in silo like you said. We end up collaborating with each other a lot. There are collaborations between art fairs, foundations, auction houses, galleries that end up happening, and that has all helped in driving the domestic market, and the primary driver for Indian prices is very much domestic and not so much international. And I find that really interesting versus the rest of the world where things tend to happen differently. And interestingly, of course, my father was collaborating with Christie's in the 90s and the 2000s, and then more recently, we did a presentation of an artist, Binod Bihari Mukherjee, in Art Basel. James saw the work there. James and I ended up collaborating and doing an exhibition at David Zwirner in London that I feel like immediately elevated the visibility of the artist. He's now on view at the Royal Academy. So it's really interesting how these things end up happening. And so I feel like all kinds of collaborations can help, and that's where we are today in Indian art.
Great. I'm interested, though, Damian, to bring up that point that Roshni said, in which domestic demand really is driving the Indian economy. But obviously, you work with a lot of non-resident Indians as well, people from abroad who are clients of yours who really matter to the market. And we're also at a point in which Indian art has never been, in a way, more exposed on the public stage in terms of exhibitions. India is about to have its third pavilion at Venice. We have major exhibitions right now in New York, Paris, London of Indian art that didn't happen necessarily so much before. So how much, again, does that sort of level of exposition, circulation, and as well as Indian clients abroad matter?
Yeah, I mean, I don't refute much, as it'll disappoint Roshni, that obviously the domestic market is absolutely critical, and I think also that nuance between between the primary market. I mean, Roshni mentioned as well how contemporaries in the secondary market, which particularly pre-financial crisis were kind of the hot thing to buy internationally. And I think you had this rapid surge in the secondary market of the high prices. By a lot of them were either not India-based or not Indian, not even of Indian origin. They were, it became this kind of global phenomenon, and there was, of course, post-financial crisis, this kind of dip in prices, and I think there is a caution from us now that we also do want to, in a different way, support these artists. So yeah, there's always a caution in including them in auctions, because you want to be able to support the higher prices, as Roshni said. But the big difference in and the correlation between that and now is that as the market kind of rebuilt itself and reimagined itself post-financial crisis, in particular. When you get to sort of COVID period to now, where the strange idiosyncrasy of this market is that it's the market that really grew since COVID, whereas most other international art markets actually suffered. So the international audience played a big role in that as well. And of course, we want to have buyers from as many parts of the world as possible, and these institutional shows, exhibitions, galleries showing at art fairs around the world and exposing this work and presenting it is critical.
I think that really leads us on to sort of our last question or theme, which is how value is decided by economic, factors. And obviously, the last 5 years for the Indian art market have been tremendous, and that's really been tied to the tremendous growth of the Indian economy, as well as also conversations around post-coloniality and, Western institutions also wanting to diversify their programs. It all sort of contributes, but certainly the Indian economy can't be ignored. Couple of questions in terms of, to everyone here, in terms of how the last economic boom do you think is affecting Indian art, but particularly, I guess, notions of value. Maybe Damian, if you can still hold the mic. Do you see a rush of new buyers coming in? Certainly you're achieving record prices. What does that mean?
Yes, and in short, I mean, you do see, each sale on sale, we do see more and more different buyers. Now, there's still a strong bias of buyers from India or of Indian origin. That will always, I think, be the case, and that's something that you wouldn't particularly want to change. But what you want to do is to see it grow internationally, because what you want is this to, in the long term, sustain and grow and find Indian artworks in more and more wider international collections, and that is something we're seeing. You're seeing buying from Middle East, from Europe and the UK, from North America, from other parts of Asia, and it really is growing. And I think people do, it becomes, I never know how to express it, whatever the positive version of a vicious cycle is, but when you have these prices, and I promise I won't do another monologue on Gramyacha, but when you have something like that hits kind of out of the art world bubble, and it's on sort of like local radio around the world, that does grab people's attention. And so you do have more and more people who see the shows happening around the world, who see the prices being set, who see more and more presence of Indian galleries I mean, you saw the difference even at Frieze, in London, that you do have more attention on Indian art from different parts of the world. And that's a good thing, but that's kind of part and parcel of when a market is growing at the rate that this one is.
Roshni, you not only deal art to people in Delhi and Bombay and Calcutta, or around the world, but also the domestic demand in India is also growing in terms of what we call tier 2 and tier 3 cities, who are increasingly becoming important clients of yours. I wonder, how does that also affect the sort of work that you show, or the sort of your gallery program, when you're now having to engage with a more diverse audience, not just abroad but also in the country itself?
Well, obviously, there's huge demand now from everywhere within India. In fact, the last 6 months have been an example of that, because we 4 galleries collaborated on a project in Chennai, and then India Art Fair did its first outpost edition in Hyderabad, and both things were extremely successful. And what we realized was there's a whole kind of wide group of people who is actually dying to be part of this market, and they feel like they don't even get access to anything. Because, I mean, there was like a simple question in the audience when I was speaking in Chennai, where somebody said, when we come at 11 a.m. to India Art Fair, how are things already sold? And I said, there are PDFs that go out. And they were surprised that, there are pre-sales that happen before the fair. And I mean, it was a naive question, but it was a really good question. And so I feel like there's incredible demand. And like Damian said, that during COVID, there was a huge surge of interest from everywhere, because online actually made it easier for people to access work, because often entering a gallery can be intimidating, and you don't want to ask prices. But what people don't realize is that we are here for the business. And that's why art fairs become really important, because everyone knows that at the end of the day, it is a marketplace, and everyone is here to sell. And that actually helps grow the market. And so with the art fairs, and of course, I mean, there are really important like the Kochi Biennale, and our participation in art fairs all over the world. We were the only Indian gallery in Art Basel, Miami Beach, and people were really excited to have us there. And so I feel like all of this contributes a lot, and artists being more and more visible in biennales all over the world. And sorry, I drifted a little bit. You asked about my presentations and how they differ in all of these places. It's very kind of well thought out on what I would take to a Hyderabad versus what I would take to Basel, because the interest is different. And even though, of course, we would love for everyone to be interested in everything, but I think that, and we try and introduce some of the emerging artists that we are working with now in different parts of the world. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting how like somebody like Aravinda Reddy got the maximum amount of attention in Hyderabad when we showed his work there. And this time we're going to be showing early works by Ghulam Sheikh in Basel. So, and that's what the committee wanted us to bring there. So it very much differs everywhere. And we're, luckily the gallery deals with 4 generations of artists, so I'm able to kind of pick and choose what I show where.
I think that's a great example of how you're sort of considering the reception of a work, its audience, in determining the value and where it's going to be best received. Just staying on you quickly, I want to get a little bit more granular in terms of economic policy. In the last year, we saw the CST, being lowered. For example, we've seen has it had an impact on art sales in your gallery?
Huge impact. The GST went down from 12% to 5%, and within those 15 days, I saw people close sales with less discount, which is amazing. And also people who just kind of postponed the invoicing. But I think that makes a massive difference. And I'm so happy that the government is actually recognizing culture as an important sector in the country, as something to invest in. More recently, of course, the news came that the government is finally doing an India Pavilion in Venice. And things like that are so important to really take market to the next stage.
Of course, while there are certainly great steps in that direction, I think we can also agree that Indian art will also remain domestic until certain policies are changed in terms of bringing art from abroad and exporting it. James, David Zwirner is one of the few very good international galleries at the fair, and you've been doing the fair for a couple of years, but India Art Fair has never reached that critical mass of a lot of big galleries coming in. For example, no major gallery has an outpost in India, for example, in the way that many of them do in China and have done for several decades. As we're looking at this moment where, is India the next China, our new economic boom? What are the sort of the main roadblocks, do you think, for Indian art, for international art not circulating so widely in India?
It's our fifth time doing the fair, and we're always thrilled to come back. And we're seeing in those 5 editions, we've seen huge growth in the market, and some of the things you're mentioning, the kind of people coming from cities that we hadn't necessarily encountered when we first came in 2018. But I think there's certainly a direction of travel that we're seeing, and I think with some of the private institutions that have been opening, some of the new spaces, we're seeing more, I think even at the fair this year, there's more international visitors. We've certainly, when we first did the art fair, the sales that we made to Indian clients really happened during that fair, and that was it. But this year we've made catalogue sales of works that are not here. We've also seen our Indian clients in our galleries across the world. We're in London, New York, Paris, Los Angeles, and Hong Kong. So we're seeing it becoming less kind of domestic now in terms of bars to entry for a gallery opening. I'm not sure there's barriers to entry. I just think there needs to be a sort of further travel along that line, and helpful policies to allow easier import and things like that. I'm sure would be received, but yes, who we'll see how far that goes, I suppose.
Megha, in terms of looking to this idea of India's growth and the future of the Indian art market, how it can grow in value, I think that looking or comparing it to, say, a market like China is interesting, but also comparing art to luxury is also very interesting. So you're really across the growth of luxury in India as well as obviously abroad. Are there any sort of lessons you think the Indian art world or the art market could learn from how luxury has managed to scale up here?
Wow, I don't know if I'm really authorized to answer that big question.
I would disagree.
But I do second with all my colleagues over here, and especially with James, when you touched upon the regulations in the country, which needs to be eased out a little bit. I think one of the biggest blocking points is that, where the market has to open up for these rare objects, because all of them are rare, and we do survive on rarity. And according to the government, as of now, this has not been the point of focus, I would say, because they have many more things going on in the country. And we have been struggling a lot in the last less than 2 years that I've been here in this position. Normally, when you head a brand, your most of your time is actually dedicated in terms of making the business grow. But I can say that 50% of my time has actually gone in regulatory issues, and solving them. So this is something, and yes, if people ask me whether India is going to be the next China, my answer is no, it's not. It is still a sleeping elephant, which is slightly waking up right now, but when it's fully awakened and it starts running, it's difficult to stop the growth to happen. So I think we are in that crux of period. In the coming 5 years, we're going to see a lot of traction in this industry, whether it's art or luxury, because art for me falls in luxury as well. When we talk about, when our Prime Minister in India is talking about making India as a developed market by 2047, we do understand that his agenda is to make sure that if we are going to be a developed market, what are the fundamentals that needs to be put in place? And yes, quality controls, regulations, all of that are necessary, whether it's China, whether it's Korea, Japan. If we talk about the Asian markets, all of them went through that transition. And it took a good 5 to 10 years for them to really settle down in these processes. So once all of this is settled down, and in the coming next to 5 to 8 years, we're going to probably see a very different India from today. There are a lot of hurdles that we're going to pass.
Do you think it's primarily going to be because of changes in regulation that are going to spur on those?
That is one. For me, from a luxury perspective, it's a threefold thing. One is definitely the government regulations. The second one is also the clients. The clients, the way they see luxury or art in India, because people want to buy abroad. They don't want to buy in India, the rich families, the ones who can afford. So currently we have a lot of Indian consumers who are buying abroad, and that number is only growing. And then the third fold is that when you take the government and the client's policies, then the brands become a little bit more cautious and prudent and they say, okay, let's wait and watch what's going to happen, you know.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a really good point. Actually, yeah, both your first and second points, the second one being that there's also this more indescribable notion of value in terms of where an artwork or a luxury brand is placed or being sold from. You see it all across the world. I'll give you an example. Like in Marseille in the south of France, local collectors don't buy from Marseille galleries. They want to buy from a Paris gallery or a Berlin gallery or a London gallery. It's more fashionable. And I think that that clearly is impacting, again, in luxury. I think regulation is probably a good point to end on, because it's clearly a way in which the governments have also ascribed value as well. Indian government takes a relatively protectionist stance on some parts of the art market. For example, the 1972 Art and Antiquities Act, which prevents a lot of the export of art and antiquities, and also about 9 master artists. So you see people like Amrita Sher Gill, Ravi Varma. Their markets act very differently, because if you buy a work from abroad, you can't take it out again. Any work in the country can't be exported. Maybe Damian will end on that, but how does that sort of impact the secondary market value of some of India's best known artists? And then we'll hand to questions.
I think effectively for works that are non-exportable, you create a dual market situation. So there's the domestic market, and if the work is in India, it is limited to that. It does, of course, mean that if you have a work that has already exists outside of the country and that has been exported within the time frames that a lot of these regulations, the National Art Treasures regulations it's pre-1972, so there's a lot of works that were out before that time. There's obviously a stronger and deeper market for that. So particularly if you're talking about Raja Ravi Varma or a Sher Gill or Tagore's, for example, that are outside, because they're rare enough in any case, and then rarer still to find one outside that has that perfect provenance and all the due diligence has been done. There's a real premium on that. So for those works, if they exist outside, you have an added. You're having many more competing at that price point, and that's why you tend to have the higher prices. But there's far fewer out there, so you tend to still have more and high quality works in India. And as we've seen with prices achieved, we can't pretend that the top prices aren't being achieved from that domestic market alone.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to end on, and just in terms of how different types of value are really overlapping and impacting each other in ways that we often couldn't even predict. I think we have about 10 minutes of time for questions from the audience, in case anyone has one. Any takers? Yes, we have one at the. Sorry, can someone pass? Yeah, there you go.
Understood a lot about how the institutions are reaching out to the market and how the market behaves. But how does an artist, how does an artist know what kind of work he's producing is valuable? Like, to him, the work is the best, right? And it's very meaningful also. And all his thought process has gone into it, making it more meaningful for the public. But then how does he reach out to the public? And how does he know that what his work is worth? So I just want to understand that.
I think so. I'll probably allow both James and Roshni to answer that as people who work directly with artists. But clearly there's, I think, some tension between, the idiosyncrasy of artistic genius sometimes, but then also the world in which it circulates in, that also determines value. So maybe James, do you want to go first as to?
Hi, thank you. I think good advice I would give to any artist is, the market needs to respond to the artist shouldn't respond to the market. And I think going through art history, while that has happened in general, I think you're giving up some of your artistic integrity if you're following the market or thinking about what does the market want. So, but we see in terms of the other parts of your questions, and how does the artist access? We see our role as the gallerist as being that access, as being that advisor across every single thing that the artist may be doing, including pricing, of course, as well. So, there are artists that do work outside of the gallery system, and some of them quite successfully. But, as a gallerist, I will sit here and defend the gallery system and gallery representation as being the kind of, primary method for an artist to achieve that.
What's that?
I mean, look, art fairs are a great meeting point for artists and galleries, and I think, galleries are also always looking at artists, and that's why, as a gallerist, our role is to also be aware of what's happening, looking at other artists at fairs. How I came across Bino Bahari Mukherjee and met Roshni, as she described, that was at an art fair. So, art degree shows starting at the very beginning, competitions that artists enter. Artists don't. There's many steps, say, between an artist starting work and joining a gallery like David Zwirner, but this is where this whole kind of ecosystem links together, I suppose.
Roshni, do you have anything to add to that?
I think, James, I think, answered the question very well, but I would just say that I think what the Indian art world needs is a lot more entrepreneurship. So, of course, there are more galleries today than there were 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and I think that ecosystem just needs to grow, because obviously there are so many artists who graduate from art school every year, and they are looking for opportunities, and I completely understand that it's extremely difficult to break into the system. A gallery like ours, I can't even imagine how many emails Zwirner gets a day, but we obviously get so many artists approaching us, and it does become difficult to entertain every request. I'm just going to be honest here, but I think that, it just requires relationship building more than anything else, and so relationship between artists and curators, between artists and gallerists, and between everybody really, to make those kind of introductions possible and for artists to get more opportunities.
Thanks. Yeah, of course. Yeah, please, Megha. Yeah.
I don't really have the expertise they carry, but I do remember one example when I was working on a collaboration with Van Gogh. Van Gogh was not even recognized, even after he was dead. It was his sister-in-law who found his diary and started writing stories based on his writing, and then did a private exhibition. And that's when Van Gogh started being known, well known. So I think storytelling and being relevant to the time is very important. And if you can't show that as an artist to a gallery, it's the same. At Luxury, we do a lot of partnerships with artists, but not everything works. It has to be relevant to that time.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yep, sure. I think probably that's our last one, but yeah, go ahead.
Hi, am I audible? My question is for Roshni. I have been working in the fashion industry, so there's been a very common term that when the designers make something, it is sometimes more artistic, and so the merchandisers come and say that we want to make the piece a little bit more commercial. So I just wanted to understand, is this trend sort of similar in the art world also? Are some pieces sometimes a little bit more towards the artistic side, and you as business people want to get it towards the more commercial side? Are these terms also relevant in the art industry?
Thank you. I think you're absolutely right, and we work with artists, some of whom are more commercial and just easier for the audience to consume, and there are other works. In fact, my booth is a perfect example of that as well, because there are works that are very easy for a collector to take home, and then there are works that we are showing which are very obviously for institutions. I'll give an example of an artist who I'm hoping makes it to the panel on Sunday. Okay, so there's an artist who I very recently started working with, Ashfika Rahman from Bangladesh, and the work that I'm showing right now is about Hindu deaths in Bangladesh and Muslim deaths in India. And that's, I was giving a tour today, and I was telling a group of ladies who actually my mother had brought to the booth, and I think my mom's eyes popped out when I gave the description of the artwork. And so that's very obviously not commercial, but it's a very, very strong artistic expression. And we're okay with that, actually, and it doesn't need to become commercial, because some artists just kind of stick to that lane and end up getting incredible success in other ways.
Ashvika's talk is on the 8th, just plugging that in.
I think that's a great example again of how there are there are many kinds of values basically, and some artists simply, as Roshni pointed out, that they're not so commercially viable, but then institutions, art critics also are very active people in this ecosystem that will then step in to sort of ascribe a different kind of value if that artwork appeals to a different social ideal. I think that's probably all we have time for. I'd like to thank all my panelists so much, Megha, James, Roshni, Damian, and thank you all so much for your questions and for being here. Thank you.
And I'd like to thank the entire panel, because this is one of the more honest conversations we've had with numbers and figures, which is rare, ironically, because it's a fair and we should be having these conversations, and I'm really glad the audience was here for that. So thank you for being so very honest about the multiple aspects that you're bringing to the table. And for all of you, thank you for being here with us today. And a big round of applause for ISL translators and all my panelists on stage, please.